We're going to get started in about 5 minutes, so if you could, if you'd like a glass of water, there's water at the back. Otherwise, please find a seat. All right, it's right on 7 o'clock, so let's get started. My name is Anna Murray, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Grimsby, Lincoln, and West Lincoln Chambers of Commerce, it is my privilege to welcome you here today, and we thank you very much for joining us. If we could all just take a minute and silence our phones, that would be excellent. Our federally elected officials create policies that not only have far-reaching implications across Canada and the world, but also have a direct impact on the economic prosperity of our community. As your local chambers of commerce, we recognize that we have a role to play in helping the citizens of West Niagara make informed decisions as to who will speak on behalf of our businesses, our families, and our communities. As your local Chamber of Commerce, we are committed to being the voice of member businesses to all levels of government. We actively work to identify issues and government policies affecting Chamber members, connect our members with government resources, and help to build relationships with representatives of local, regional, provincial, and federal governments. It is our privilege as part of that mandate to be able to facilitate tonight's Federal All Candidates Night for Niagara West. It is no small undertaking to run for elected office, and I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all of those gentlemen at the table who have taken on that role. In order to ask as many questions as possible this evening, we've broken our agenda into 4 sections. In the first section, our moderator will introduce the candidates, and they will each provide opening remarks. During our question and answer period, the moderator will pose the question, and the candidates will each be given 1 minute to answer. Please note that all questions must be submitted in writing and will be posed by the moderator. We will not be taking any questions from the floor. The cutoff for accepting questions will be at the end of the candidates' introductions. So if you have any questions that you still have left to ask, please do get them to the yellow table over there as soon as possible. And just a note about the questions, please note that we can't guarantee that all questions will be asked. We are very happy to see that we've had a really strong participation in the question section, which is excellent. Our panel is reviewing the questions submitted to make sure that they relate appropriately to the federal government sphere of influence, and questions of a similar nature may be grouped and or reworded for clarity or to reduce repetition. At the conclusion of our question period, the candidates will be given the opportunity to give their closing remarks. And then we'll end the evening with an informal meet and greet with the candidates. So if there were any questions that you hadn't brought forward or you'd like to explore and answer further, you'll have an opportunity to talk to them one-on-one. We are very excited to share that tonight's all-candidate event is being live streamed to our Facebook pages. Please join me in thanking Kevin from WeeStreem, who is providing this service free of charge. If you're interested in increasing the exposure of your next event, please reach out to Kevin. He's got business cards at his table as well as at our table. So, we've got a lot to cover this evening, and I want to make sure we stay on schedule because you don't really want to hear about me, you want to hear from them. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. David Siegel. David Siegel has recently retired after a 41-year career teaching political science at Brock University. During his time at Brock, he held various positions, including Associate Vice President, Dean of 2 faculties, and was chair of his department. He was also the founding director of the Niagara Community Observatory, a public policy think tank working in partnership with the Niagara community to foster, produce, and disseminate research on current and emerging issues. David has written extensively in the areas of public administration and local government. He is co-author or co-editor of 8 books and has published numerous articles in academic journals and professional publications. His latest book is Leaders in the Shadows, The Leadership Qualities of Municipal Chief Administrative Officers. In retirement, David continues to research and write, but is enjoying spending more time cycling and attending concerts, plays, and baseball games. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Toronto and an MA in public administration from Carleton, and he is also a chartered professional accountant. Dr. Siegel, thank you for joining us. Just give us 1 second to move the mic.
Okay? Can we do it a little farther? I feel like I'm going to take a bite out of it. Thank you very much for that introduction, Anna. I will do my best to keep everything on track so we can have a good opportunity to hear our speakers and also get finished at the appropriate time. This is a great opportunity for the speakers tonight to get their message out to you as voters. It's also a great opportunity for you as voters to hear what they have to say and to inform yourself about that very important decision that you're going to be making on October 21st. So we want to be very careful and ensure that all of the speakers have an opportunity to speak. The Chambers of Commerce have done a really good job of encouraging public engagement in terms of asking people to submit questions in advance and submitting questions today. I would ask that people not engage in any public engagement during the speeches tonight. When a speaker is finished, I think it's fine to applaud or not, depending on your interest. But out of respect for the speakers, let's not have any interruptions of the speakers while they are speaking. So let's get started. The order will be starting to my immediate right and working our way down the table. And the first, each person will do a 2-minute introduction. Then there will be questions. When we ask the questions, I will start with the second person, Mr. Rahman, and so forth, so that everybody has an opportunity to be first and last with regard to a question. So having said that, Mr. Allen, and each candidate has 2 minutes for an introduction, and we have a timer sitting up here, and I've warned the candidates that in the interest of being fair to everybody, I will be ruthless in terms of cutting you off at exactly 2 minutes. So, Mr. Allison.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the three chambers of commerce for hosting the debate tonight. As a longtime chamber member and the past president of the Lincoln Chamber, I know the kind of good work that you do in our communities, and so I want to thank the members, the volunteers, and of course the staff for their excellent work. As a business person, I understand many of the challenges you're going through or been through over the years. As you work hard to provide a living for many of your staff and your families, and as you fight through regulation, red tape, staffing issues, new legislation, and making sure there's enough money left over at the end of the month to pay all your bills and hopefully set aside some money for that rainy day or for when you finally decide to retire. And for those of you that don't own a business, you face some of the similar challenges. You work hard, you play by the rules, and yet somehow, no matter how hard you work, there's never much money left over as you would like there to be at the end of the month. You work harder and harder, and yet the government seems to take more and more of your money the harder you work. I was knocking on doors in Grimsby last Friday night, and I ran into a single mother who was struggling to get ahead. She had a decent vehicle in the driveway. It was a nice house. And as we talked, she shared some of her struggles of recent years. She talked about raising 3 kids on her own and wanting them to do well in school, be successful in life. And she talked about the cost of sending them to university. She also talked about how hard it is to get ahead. She does not consider herself rich. She also does not mind paying her fair share of taxes. But she realizes we live in this great country and that there's those around us who are less fortunate and sometimes need help. But at the end of the month, after tuition is paid, her mortgage is paid, her payments on her vehicles, there's not much left over. I wish I could say that this lady's the exception, but I have to say, as I've knocked on doors all over the riding, this keeps coming up. People feel that they are working harder and harder and taking home less and less. Our Conservative government has a plan to put more of your hard-earned tax dollars back in your pockets. Tonight, I'm looking forward to discussing how we'll do that, and how we'll plan will be so much different than the other parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. The next speaker is Mr. Rahman.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rahman, and I'm not sure how many of you remember me from the last election, but I was the candidate the last time around, and some of you may remember I'm an immigrant to Canada, and I've had the good fortune of seeing Canada from both coasts, seeing the prairie areas, seeing everything that Canada has to offer, and finally finding a home in Grimsby about 8 years ago, which is where I live with my wife and kids. But my wife asked me, why do I want to run in this election? You know, we've got 2 young ones, time is constrained, and I said, look, in the last few years, it feels like that the world has exploded. That we've got challenges coming upon us, both in our individual capacities, in our communities, and as a nation that we need to face, whether it's an issue of the environment, whether it's the economy, whether it's diversity. And I think this is the time to step forward because Canada is at crossroads, and we are as a society at crossroads. So I'm running to ensure that whatever choices you make, you're not going to have a false choice. That when you step forward, we're not going to have to choose something like the environment against national unity. I'm running on accountability, that the promises that were made and broken by the last government have to be accounted for, and that what I personally find are the ethical challenges of our last government have to be brought to the forefront. I'm running because I believe that Canada and Niagara West deserve better than it has received than what it has received in the past. And that things like pushing your businesses ahead, opening up the global stage, environment, social policy like childcare and pharmacare are things that will make differences in everybody's lives, not just businesses, but families. Finally, the NDP loves the word hope, but hope isn't good enough for me. You need a government that's willing to act and willing to act for you, and I would like to be that voice for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman. The next speaker will be Mr. Bingham.
Thanks, Dave. So good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming, particularly so many of you, because it's not said enough, but this election isn't about me. It's not about the people sitting beside me. It's not about the leaders. It's about you. It's about you and your families. And so I just want to tell you a bit about where I'm coming from and why I want to run to be a representative. When I was a teenager, I would work with children's aid camps and underprivileged youth, and I would go up north to the Iqaluit suicide hotlines. And I enjoyed my service there, and so when I was 19, I joined the Canadian Forces. And for 10 years, I served in the military as an intelligence officer. I was deployed around Canada and eventually overseas in the Middle East in the War on Terror. And when I came back, I now have the privilege of serving my clients in the courtroom as a defense lawyer. Many of my clients have opioid addiction, homelessness, and mental health issues. And so I've seen my share of suffering. But I think you have to go overseas to other countries to see how great our nation really is. It is the best country in the world, and we have to fight to keep it that way. And I've been especially proud of Canada over the last 4 years. When we have a robust economy that's doing the best it's ever been in unemployment, we finally have a government that's speaking up for the environment and has a plan to fight pollution, and also lifting people out of poverty, seniors, children, the underprivileged. This is what it's all about. It's about us working together for a common goal. Just like in the military, we never leave anybody behind. And it's been a great privilege to talk to thousands of you at your doors over the last few weeks and months. And I've been with my fiancée Abigail, who's here taking notes for me so that if there's a question I don't know the answer to, we're going to research it and we're going to find out what it is. I currently live in Grimsby, so my issues are your issues. We share issues. And when I hear at the doors the issues with transportation, healthcare, seniors, the odor of cannabis, this is what I'm going to fight for you to resolve. I will work every single day for you. And I want to serve you the way I've served Canada overseas and in the courtroom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather is next.
First of all, I want to thank you, the Chamber of Commerce, the organizers of the event, and to you, people in the audience, for attending tonight. The first promise that I will make to you is that I will not fudge any of my credentials. I attended Beamsville High School and then the University of Guelph. I worked for the region of Niagara as a social worker and then the supervisor of social services for the city of Niagara Falls. I completed a master's degree at Simon Fraser University and was a teacher and administrator in a very difficult inner-city school in the largest school district in British Columbia, which was a job that I loved for over 30 years. My wife is the CEO of the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, and my daughter is an emergency room nurse in the large hospital in British Columbia. Discussions with them are often about issues relative to healthcare, animal and human rights, species extinction, and the cost of housing. I'm a director on the Lincoln Library Board and the Museum Board. No, I am not a businessman, but I am a good listener and a quick learner. I have been passionate about two things for over a decade: climate change and government and electoral reform. We have been ringing the climate bell for over 20 years. Under the ethical leadership of Elizabeth May, we have developed the strongest platform, the clearest targets, and the best plan to meet the climate obligations that our country signed on to in the Paris Agreement of 2015. Our multifaceted Mission Possible plan will provide employment for hundreds of thousands of Canadian workers in a new, growing green economy while ensuring a future for not just for our children, but for theirs. Every day I knock on doors, I hear people say that they don't trust politicians. We need to restore their faith. We believe in a new way of doing government. We need real change in Niagara West and in Canada, and now is your opportunity to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker is next.
I would like to introduce myself as a father of 13 children, whom my wife of 21 years and I are thankful for. I can humbly say that we have been able to provide for them, working for and running Jonker Trucking for the past 24 years. I have run for the Christian Heritage Party in the last 2 elections, and I'm running again because I want them and their generation of Canadian citizens to have a bright future. But do they? From 2008 to 2015, the Conservative government added $150 billion to our debt. From 2015 to 2019, the Liberal government has added $81 billion. They have both added $20 billion per year to our debt. Because they cannot say no and make the tough decisions to cut our spending, we are now spending $26 billion a year on interest, or for the 2 minutes that it took for this speech to be is $100,000 for the 2 minutes. We cannot keep robbing the next generation. So we need a government that is willing to make some tough decisions. The CHP will. The CHP is not out to buy your vote, but to earn it. Not only are we robbing them of their future earnings, but they are losing their future neighbors. How? Because there is not one single party here besides the Christian Heritage Party that is willing to touch the abortion industry and the lies and harm it has pushed on our society and our would-be mothers. We as a society need to be better informed about what is happening to our wonderful mothers and to the children they have lost. We need a government that will do this compassionately and loving, and the CHP would. The CHP is the only party that is willing to stand for family, life, and freedom.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
Hello, I'm Miles Morton, the People's Party of Canada candidate for Niagara West. Before I tell you a bit about myself, let me tell you a bit about the People's Party of Canada. We're a grassroots political movement which wishes to give working class Canadians a real voice in Ottawa, not elitist or special interest groups. We're the fastest growing political party in Canadian history. We already have more party members than the Green Party of Canada, and we're just over a year old. And they've been around since the 1980s. To me, this is a sign that the Canadians are hungry for change. Canadians are sick and tired of the Liberals and the Conservatives taking turns destroying our country. I spent a great deal of my childhood in the riding, attending St. Joseph's Elementary School and Blessed Trinity High School in Grimsby, Ontario. I did not grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I predominantly lived with a single parent in a single parent household with my father on disability. As a result, I've had to work for everything I've been given in my life. And I understand the struggles of everyday Canadians just trying to put food on the table or gas in their car. My family has resided in Southern Ontario for many generations. As a result, I have a deep love for my community instilled in me by my father and grandparents. My family lineage and connection to Canada are an integral part of who I am as a person, and this motivates me every day to try to change our community for the better. This has caused my involvement with Canadian Blood Services and multiple environmental organizations. I've overcome learning disabilities and poverty to graduate university as a Dean's List University student and become an elite athlete representing our community on the university and interprovincial level. In tonight's debate, I want everyone to pay attention to the answers put forth to my political opponents. Are they going to give specifics?
Thank you very much, Mr. Morton.
Okay.
The next section, is composed of some questions that the chambers have put forward tonight. And we'll start, the first person to respond to this question will be Mr. Rahman, and we'll work our way down the table that way, and Mr. Allison will be the last person to respond. The question, this All Candidates event is being hosted by the Grimsby, Lincoln, and West Lincoln Chambers of Commerce, representing the business owners and operators in our community. There has been a significant shift in the relationship of Canada with our international trading partners in the past 3 years. As the international markets evolve, what steps would your party take to address relations with China, the United States, and opening up other markets to Canadian businesses?
Thank you very much for the question. There are many people out there who think that we can live in an isolationist economy without having to step out into the world. But our best opportunity for growth and for best opportunity for us to engage in wealth development, one of them is engaging in the outside world, finding new export markets, etc. If you take a look at how our foreign policy has been handled in the last little while, it's been slightly problematic, actually a little more than slightly problematic. We've lost about $5 billion on the agricultural side on soybean alone, and our trading relationship with our biggest trading partner right now, the US, has been frayed. On top of that, we have issues from a foreign policy standpoint with countries like Saudi Arabia, and Trudeau has gone out of his way to upset the Indians, which is one of the biggest growing economies in the world. I think we need a reset on the foreign policy. The foreign policy reset would include opening up South Asia or markets like South Asia so that we've got export potential over there. It means resetting our relationship with China, and I'm not sure how you'd handle Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman.
Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Bingham.
So when we talk about global economy, we look at the last 4 years, I think it's important to point to the 3 treaties and trade agreements that have been forged by the government of the last 4 years. And we're talking about the one with Europe, with Indonesia, and now with the United States. So contrary to what my friend is saying, we've opened up the market completely. We're the only G7 country to have trade agreements with all the other G7 countries. And 1.5 billion people that we can now open the market up to for small businesses to trade with. And you know, our leader currently has done a very good job in the overseas stage. When I was overseas in the military, I would see his face on the back of trucks in Pakistan. So well loved to see across the world. And this is a leader that's going to help with those volatile countries of China and the United States. This is a leader that stood up to him in the last 4 years, will continue to stand up to them, and we'll look to open up new markets in new countries that we can start exporting our important business to, and especially the unique resources that we have here in Niagara West.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
Certainly no doubt that free trade has had its value to Canadian economy. We do respect the free trade agreements that have been negotiated, but they are not without difficulties. They are not without job losses. We have had jobs, particularly in St. Catharines, that have moved south of the border, even Mexico. These are issues that we need to address. We also need to consider how closely we are aligned with the United States. As you know, the current government of the United States has caused more than its fair share of difficulty for all the industries, particularly trade with China. Particularly for Greens, we're quite concerned about renegotiating Canada's trade and investments agreements. We need to remove the investor-state dispute settlement provisions. Foreign corporations now have extraordinary powers to negotiate where Canadian laws should take precedence, and that is no longer the case.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker is next.
Yeah, the Christian Heritage Party definitely understands what it means to work together with governments that have the same values as ours. What we definitely need to look at when we are working in a global market is are we helping support a government that is abusing like child labor, stuff like that. We also would definitely be, we do need to continue to promote trade agreements and with our close neighbors, the U.S. Being one of them, and being in the trucking industry, I definitely understand that it's one of our biggest trade partners, and we need to make sure that is done wisely. Tariffs are something that we can use to protect our economy and against unfair foreign competition.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker.
Thank you.
Mr. Morton.
We need to eliminate tariffs and open up the market to as many countries and promote free trade with as many countries as possible. Our governments that have been in power have been destroying our manufacturing sector. Since 2006, over 250,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost. Since Trudeau was elected, over 100,000 jobs have been lost in the oil and gas sector, in our energy sector. So what we need to do is we need to drop corporate taxation rates. We need to eliminate the carbon tax and all carbon pricing, not eliminate it with a different type of carbon pricing like the Conservative government wants to do. And we need to try to keep jobs in Canada. Middle-class Canadian families need jobs. They need jobs to be able to support their families. And I think it's morally reprehensible to deny them that right.
And Mr. Allison.
Thank you very much. As the Shadow Minister for Trade, I've had a chance firsthand to see what's going on in the world, and there's a number of things that we talked about. Ian is correct. There are a bunch of deals that we already have with major competitors, such as Asia and such as Europe. It was deals that the Conservatives started and the Liberals helped get across the finish line. You got to give credit where credit's due. They actually made that happen. I guess my concern with deals right now is that we got a competitiveness issue in this country, and there's things that we need to do to shore up our own companies right now. And when I talk about competitiveness, I talk about infrastructure. I talk about access to capital. I talk about taxation. I talk about the cost of capital. I talk about the commercialization of research and development. I talk about pipelines that need to be built. I talk about red tape. There's a whole host of things that we need to look at as a country to become more competitive. One of the things I would start with is the whole issue of infrastructure. We got great deals in place right now with major markets, but we got to figure a way to get our goods to market, and that's something we need to do. And this hasn't even given me a chance to talk about pipelines yet, but I'll do that one later. I'm sure it's going to come up.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Bingham. And the next question is a two-part question. There's a lot of discussion about the middle class and making life more affordable in this election. What are your party's plans to reduce costs for the middle class, seniors, recent graduates, and families? Second part, in the same way that Canadians and Niagara West residents have to live within their means, how do you propose to pay for these promises that you have just outlined? Mr. Bingham first.
Okay, it's a shame we only have 1 minute, but when we're talking about reducing the strain on the middle class, look at the history that's already happened and the track record the Liberals have. This is the only government in the last little bit that's dropped taxes for the middle class, raised them on the wealthiest 1%. We're going to keep doing that because the middle class needs help. It's the strong backbone of our economy. And so when we're talking about reducing costs to seniors, the pledge is to increase the income to seniors. I'm going to be looking at especially helping seniors out, make ends meet with an increased quantity they receive each month. When we talk about graduates that need help, look at the plan that the Liberal platform has released. Going to be adding extra grants to students, making a 2-year grace period, or if they have a child, it means that they won't have to pay interest for quite some time. And families in general, we already have the CCB, the Canada Child Benefit, has put a lot of money into the bank accounts, back into the bank accounts of parents. How do we propose to pay for this? Smart investing. It's not spending if it's done wisely. That's investing, and we're going to get a return on that investment. And we can already see that in our booming economy that we have now on our low debt-to-GDP ratio.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
We certainly understand that the middle class is looking for jobs in the future. We know that particularly when it comes to AI and a transition to the green economy, that we need to make sure that there is a just transition for workers. Particularly in the oil and gas industry, people are going to be looking for ways that the government will assist them in finding new jobs, retraining, support for moving allowances. Those sorts of things are going to be necessary. Particularly in establishing new businesses, the Greens want to make sure that people understand that home-based businesses and the ability to run businesses from home have both economic developments for them. They are far more effective for people. affordable, but at the same time, they have environmental benefits. It takes at least one car off the road every time that a particular person has to drive to work in another location, and we believe that home-based businesses have a legitimate future for the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
Yeah, the CHP is definitely aware that we are spending $26 billion on interest a year. That's something that needs to be cut back. We need to pay that mortgage off, the debt off like a mortgage. And not only that, we also have in place what we call a fair tax system. What needs to happen is the government needs to get out of your pocket. You have the right to earn money. You earn money. And we, as a government, should not be punishing you for being hardworking and taking half of your income. It needs to be in place as a more fair system where if you spend money, you pay taxes. If you don't spend money, you don't pay taxes. So nobody liked HST when it came in, but it would be a system like that. The rich spend more money, they pay more taxes. The poor spend less, they pay less taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
We're going to make life more affordable for all Canadians by simplifying the tax system into 3 tax brackets. The first $15,000 earned is going to be taxed at 0%. Then between $15,000 and $100,000 is going to be taxed at 15%. Any income earned over $100,000 is going to be taxed at 25%. We're going to get rid of the carbon tax. We're going to get rid of the capital gains tax. We're going to get rid of we're going to get rid of the CRTC, the telecom communication monopoly, bringing up the price of home internet and cell phones for all Canadians. We're going to privatize Canada's airports because right now we're ranked 124th in the world in terms of cost competitiveness. So we're going to bring more competition into that sector to try to make life more affordable for all Canadians. We're going to cut the inflation rate to 0, and we're going to pay for all this by defunding the CBC and getting rid of all media subsidies. We're going to we're going to completely eliminate corporate welfare and corporate subsidies for corporations, which amount to around $30 billion.
Okay. Mr. Allison.
Thank you. There's a number of things that we're looking at doing. One of the things is we're going to get rid of the carbon tax, and I hope we have more time to talk about that a little bit later. It's currently $30 a ton, going up to $50. People say that if we want to see any benefit in terms of change of behavior, that needs to go to $300. So that means gasoline at north of $2 a liter. We've got a universal tax credit with benefit families up to $850. We've got removal of the HST and home heating bills, which is great. And Harold, this one's for you. We want to make sure that maternity benefits are tax-free. This would be a good one. And then we also look at increasing, it's a joke, guys, we're having fun up here. And then we would want to make sure that we also look at an ability to increase the RESP, which is the education fund. So as you contribute to those things, that would make some sense. I'm going to leave it at that. I do want to talk about the carbon tax. I hope the question comes up a little bit later, but I'll leave it at that for right now.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
Big topic, little time. So I'm going to try and make this as fast as possible. If you take a look at the nature of the economy, it's shifted. You've got more precarious work right now, and the pressures on the household are such that you have to bring in a dual income. And the things that we struggle with right now under such circumstances are pharmacare and daycare and dental care, because that's where a lot of these costs add up, and families find that they can't get out to work because they just can't afford something as simple or as basic as daycare. We need 2-income families right now. Seniors, affordable housing is a big one, and that's a part of our ongoing strategy. Caregiver tax benefits for seniors, because there are people who put in time and effort but don't necessarily see any benefit for it. Seniors are aging in place in Niagara, and we have to be able to take care of them. For students, eliminate the interest on the federal loan component and provide more grants. And how are we going to pay for it? 2% tax increase on people earning over $210,000, 1% additional on $20 million, people who have assets in excess of $20 million.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Teather. The environment is a concern for Niagara West and the long-term viability of our agricultural industry. The government has implemented a price on carbon, which has increased costs of most items that we rely on. How is the additional cost being applied to protecting the environment, and what would the other parties propose to protect the environment and the agricultural viability of our riding?
Dean, the question has come up, the carbon tax question. Certainly, the Greens are in favor of a carbon tax. We're in favor of particularly a revenue-neutral carbon tax, similar to the one that exists today. Agriculture, we need to move our production systems to a more local and organic system. The climate issue is going to affect the agricultural industry severely. We need to restructure Canada's business risk management model to ensure that climate is not going to be an issue for farmers. We need to make sure that they are in a position that they are supported, that we are able to provide financial support for farmers to be able to mitigate the effects of climate change. This has nothing necessarily to do, it may in your minds have something to do with the climate tax, but is a much larger issue than that when it comes to agriculture, particularly in the Niagara region.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
Joe Oliver wrote an article, and it was in the National Post about a month ago, and it was very interesting to read. What he was saying was Canadians, if climate change and temperature is going up as we have been presented with, Canada is in an excellent position to continue to grow more and more food. As the temperature goes up, we will be able to open up more and more farmland farther and farther north that will produce, and we will have the responsibility to make sure we are doing as best we can to continue to produce for our neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
We're going to eliminate the carbon tax and all carbon pricing and not replace it with any type of scheme like cap and trade. And the other parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, their measures to try to meet the targets of the Paris Accord are going to fall on they're just not going to be able to do it because the UN has said that a carbon tax needs to be implemented of $300 a ton in order to make a difference and to meet their objectives. And I don't think that they're willing to do that. And if they are, you should ask them because, I mean, that's going to be an extreme cost on all Canadians, middle-class Canadians. It's just unacceptable. And I'm not going to make life more affordable for Canadians when they're already struggling. So that's my stance on things. And we only make up about around 1.8% of global emissions, so any reductions in emissions that we make are going to be offset by increased emissions by China, India, and Africa moving forward.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Morton.
you.
Mr. Allison.
Thank you. I was hoping I'd get a chance to talk about the carbon tax. I got to tell you, it puts us at a total competitive disadvantage. And the reality is that when you look at, for the business people that are in the room, and that includes farmers, 80–90% of the large emitters don't have to pay a carbon tax. And why is that? Because if they did, they'd be out of business. They would move their businesses south of the border. So think about that for a second. The burden of the carbon tax is going to fall on every single one of you in the room. I got another news flash. We live in Niagara West. We live in a rural riding. We don't have access, or we don't have the luxury of the kind of public transit that most communities do, and quite frankly, downtown ridings. And if they can do that, that's fantastic. The third thing I'd like to say as well is we live in a northern climate. We don't have the option of not heating our house. And so the reality is what this means is that makes life way more expensive for every one of you in the room without actually doing the things. And the whole point of a carbon tax is to punish you to the point where you say, you know what, I can't go out anymore, it's just too much, it's just too expensive. This disproportionately affects seniors and those in fixed incomes because the costs go up for them and they have no way of being able to pay for the stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
It takes something like 20-odd days of negative temperature for you to grow ice wine. And why is that relevant? With climate change, you're not guaranteed that. And I can guarantee you that climate change will impact our agricultural sector very strongly. So if we're going to tie this issue, climate change, to agriculture, yes, everybody's going to feel it. If you have a warm winter and a frost following up, your crops die on the vine, your crops die on the branch. So we need to do something about it, and that's a two-part element. Number one, meet those climate change targets, and it doesn't always have to be a carbon tax. It could be things like energy retrofits. It could be electrification. It could be electric cars. These are things that we can do on a practical basis that'll save you money, but keep our agricultural sector going. And at the same time, provide the supports that the agricultural sector needs to push through while we get to a better place. That's how you do responsible governance.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So just to reply to my friend who spoke second, regarding Canada and climate change, this is a real issue that we have to address. It's not going to make it better for Canada when we have droughts and flash floods and freezing and thawing. It's already affecting farmers who couldn't pasture their livestock as well as they wanted to this year. When Jordan Harbor is rising and all the crops are being spoiled, in the field. So this is a real issue that we have to address. I don't know where $300 a ton has come from. The reality is carbon pricing is going to work. 40 other developed countries have started it. The UN is on board. Greenpeace has championed it and advocated for it. Nobel Prize-winning economists have got on side. So this is a plan that's going to work. Contrary to what my friend who spoke forth said, the money goes back to your pockets. 90% of that goes back to you, and so most of you receive around $300 back on your tax returns. And where's the rest of the money go? It can go to green infrastructure anywhere, including hospitals. And so when I get to the House of Commons, I'm going to be fighting for you to use some of that money to help us get a new hospital.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. The next questions are questions that, next set of questions that you people have submitted either in advance or tonight. And I have to say, you did an excellent job of submitting a very large number of questions. So many that I don't think we're going to be able to ask all of the questions, but the volunteers have done a diligent job of trying to combine questions, combine similar questions, and so forth. So I think we'll be able to cover the major general areas. Start with a good local question, and this will go to Mr. Jonker first. Do you support supply management, particularly with regard to chickens, turkeys, breeding industry, and the dairy industry? Mr. Jonker.
Yeah, the agriculture sector has always been dear to my heart. My family's been involved with it in ever since I can remember. So yeah, the supply management is something that is the CHP would definitely look at. And what we always have to remember at the same time is we do need to protect the systems that we do have, but we also have to ensure that these systems are continually making it fair for the consumer as well. So if you have a marketing board that is let's say overcharging, then that's not fair for the consumer. So that needs to be addressed. So it would be something that we need to work with the boards as well as ensuring that the consumers are getting a fair price for the product that they need to buy.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
We're going to completely eliminate supply management. We're going to do this because supply management currently costs the Canadian consumer between $400 and $600 every year on dairy, poultry, and eggs. And this amounts to a 20% tax on the poorest Canadians, on lower class Canadians, and that's unacceptable to me. We're going to buy back the quota. We're not going to leave any of the farmers that are currently under the supply management system out to dry. We're going to phase it out over a number of years to give them a chance to adapt to the current marketplace. And currently only 10% of poultry farmers only 10% of farmers are currently receiving quotas under the supply management system. So it's going to affect a very small amount of the farming community, and we're going to phase out the process responsibly and without affecting anybody's farms or anybody's livelihood. We want to open up the market to the United States so people who are ambitious and can compete with the United States will be able to make more money and will have more opportunity to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Mr. Allison.
The short answer is we support supply management. We always have. And I think one of the challenges that we see around the world is that people subsidize their agriculture, whether we like it or not, all over the world. The U.S. subsidizes their agriculture in a horrendous way. And I don't see any benefit by giving up supply management ever, because then we only attack the family farm. And I guess if you really want large-scale farms, factory farms, then one sure way to do that is to get rid of the supply management. Second thing I'll mention on that is that some of the problems around NAFTA, and one of the things around that deal, the Liberals want to say it was a great deal. I'd say at best it was a save. It was a Trump was tough to deal with. But one of the things we gave up a lot on was supply management. And in particular, our dairy people now do not have the ability to export some of their isolate, some of the proteins that they're allowed to. So what's happened is, in order to get the NAFTA deal done, the U.S. dictated to us what we're allowed to export in terms of dairy products. And I think that is a bit of a travesty, because that makes it difficult for us to compete.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
This is one of the few times you'll hear Dean and I agree. But yes, if you want to see how farming is done wrong or farming policy is done wrong, you look at the States. And you've got oversupply over there that's crushed many farmers. And when they talk about what's going on in Canada and our supply management system, they wish they had a system like this. Every other agricultural economy out there is protected, including the EU. And what supply management allows us to do is balance farmer income with fair pricing. And that's always a balance that has to be negotiated on a day-by-day basis. So you can set quotas, set prices, etc. That way we ensure that our farms are still alive and functioning and profitable while we get the produce that we want. I do think it's a travesty what happened with the last NAFTA agreement, but I'm not sure how much can be done moving forward. It's important, and the NDP will do this, is hold the line. No more, we don't need to give up anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So supply management, simple. We keep defending it as we've been defending it for the last little while. I mean, this is an industry that brings in $5 billion to this area. And I just want to speak to briefly what my friend who spoke third said about NAFTA. Not what he said today, but what he said in June of this year in the House of Commons, that NAFTA negotiation was a great success. Where other parties wanted the government to capitulate and potentially lose everything, we did hold the line as best we could in the House of Commons, and that's something we should be proud of. We need to keep supporting our local farmers. So $25 million has been spent in advertising for made-in-Canada type products here. We're going to keep supporting local farmers, and I see a vision for this riding where our agriculture is internationally exported. We now have access to the CBD market. We have some brilliant innovators up in the Niagara College and in the Violent Research Center. My goal is to bring funding to those people so they can be entrepreneurs, bring jobs, and bring green agriculture jobs to this area.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
It's probably seldom that we'll get an issue that most of us agree on tonight, but I certainly agree that supply management is necessary. I agree with Mr. Allison. This supply management takes place and agriculture is supported in our neighboring countries, virtually in countries across the globe. It's a balancing act. There's no question about it. We need to balance between growers. We need to balance between what they can earn, and we need to balance that between what consumers need to pay. And as such, it's going to be a situation where cooperation and the need to cooperate is going to become paramount. We need to make sure that all stakeholders are involved and that everyone has a legitimate chance to speak their mind, and make sure that, that all people are able to do this on a regular basis.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Another trade question, a very important one. Our Constitution states that there are to be no barriers to trade between the provinces. But today, many barriers exist. What will your party do to restore free trade within Canada? We'll start with Mr. Morton.
The People's Party of Canada will get rid of all interprovincial trade barriers and eliminate all tariffs. We're going to appoint a minister of interprovincial trade that will oversee interprovincial trade and make sure that there are no tariffs and counteract special interest groups that are trying to put tariffs in place that benefit themselves and don't benefit all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Mr. Allison.
Thank you. This is a tough question. I know that our party worked on this. I know the Liberals have been working on this. This is a tough one. We have this thing called a confederation, which means provinces get to decide what they want to do. However, as was mentioned in the question, this makes us tremendously uncompetitive. Think about some of our wine guys. It's almost easier to sell your wine in New York State than it is to sell it in Alberta. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think this is something that all governments, regardless who's in, is committed to get rid of, and it's one of the things we're going to have to keep chipping away. I know that with Jason Kenney now as the Premier in Alberta, talking to people like Premier Moe in Saskatchewan, and there's a number of premiers that are starting to have a conversation about trying to liberalize some of the areas. So I think we could start with trade, and then we can look at labor and think about it. As professionals, we have a hard time actually practicing if you're a doctor or nurse across provincial borders because everyone's got their own skill set or their own people that have their own requirements. So I think we got to look at mobility of labor and a bunch of things to make this happen.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
As an immigrant, I was shocked that it's tougher to trade within Canada than it is to trade outside, and it blew me away. Did you know there's something called the Canadian Free Trade Agreements, the CFTA, which actually harmonizes or tries to harmonize trade between all the provinces? The fact that we have to negotiate this between the provinces with the federal government also tells you how complex this is. But the things that we have to do is just step up. Ensure that your services and skills harmonization happen. Ensure that you recognize each other's credentials. Ensure that you find a framework by which you can deal with things like cross-border trade, the taxation question about when you go ahead and you transfer a good from one jurisdiction to the other. This is not something that will happen overnight, but this is something that the NDP is committed to do in conjunction, hand in hand with every other government to get to that end point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So in this riding, clearly this is a question that relates strongly to the wine industry here. And so obviously it's of great concern and something the federal government's done that I'm proud of, and Mr. Allison made reference to it, is for the federal government to remove the interprovincial barriers for getting wine from province to province. What he said earlier, though, I can't agree with. He said it would be difficult to sell a bottle of wine from Ontario and Alberta. You can't. It's still up to the province to remove those barriers. And so when you have a government like we currently have in Ontario, we want to do a bit of a change around to get a more progressive government in place to help with those, help move Canada forward and trading between our provinces to strengthen our economy and our growers. My friend's already made reference to recognizing credentials. This is going to help the physician issue that we have, the doctor shortage, if that's those organizations make it a bit easier for credentials. But the key, my friends, is to listen to you and the experts among you, and that's what I plan to do to serve you and to resolve this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
Greens are synonymous in many ways with cooperation. We pride ourselves in being that way and taking all these things into consideration. The division of powers is certainly something that we're bound by, but trade across borders is not the only issue that's at stake here. Greens would institute a council of Canadian governments whose purpose would be to ensure that all governments regularly have the option of sitting down together and working out policy, particularly in areas like cross-border trade. A Council of Canadian Governments would bind together members of federal government, provincial government, municipalities such as Niagara, regional governments, and of course, Indigenous people to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to sit down and make their position known. Cross-border trade is not the only issue here that needs cooperative conversation. There are many, and Greens will ensure that people have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
Yeah, basically you do have to realize that you have a complicated system in our provincial governments. You have different parties, so in power at any time. But as a federal government, your responsibility is to represent all of Canada, not just a riding here. You definitely, as an MP, would be one to be concerned about the wine industry. That would be your job. But as a federal party, we would need to continue to work to make it easier for every single business to succeed in every province. And also, it's not just when it comes to products, but also with labor. Some provinces don't let other industries come in to do work in their provinces. So there's so many things that would need to be discussed that it's not an easy answer, but something that would need to be worked on constantly.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. The next question will go first to Mr. Allison. How does your party's platform on immigration, family reunification, and settlement services, including refugees and asylum seekers, impact Niagara West as well as the rest of the country?
Thank you for the question. This is something that we believe needs to be fair, transparent. Canada's one of the most generous countries in the world when it comes to receiving immigration. I think that what we need to continue to look at, we always need to look at where the need is, whether it's economic or where we're at. We need to do a good job of making sure that people are trained in English. And we also need to do our fair share when it comes to refugees. We punch well above our weight as Canadians in terms of the amount of refugees we resettle every year. The challenge I have right now is a number of illegal refugees coming over the border who are landing in places like New York and other places of America, then walking across at Roxham Road in Montreal or just south of Quebec there. We have to have an orderly system that's fair and transparent. There's a lot of people that lined up to get into Canada many years ago and went through the system, and we need to make sure that we're ensuring that same system for everybody that wants to come to Canada. We got a great country and people want to be here. We need to make sure the system is transparent, it's fair, and it's orderly.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
The question of immigration can be surprisingly divisive for a country of immigrants, but one of the things that most people don't realize, and this is that our actual birth rate over here is about 1.5 and the replacement rate is 2.1. We actually need immigration to help sustain our population levels against our future commitments. And on top of that, immigration helps us open up borders and helps us create new opportunities, whether it's economic development, cultural ties, etc. So our commitment is to keep those doors open, but find good skill sets and matches within our local economy to ensure that we can continue to grow in the manner that we need to grow. As for refugees, they're not coming to our borders because because things are all hunky-dory at their end. You've got people who are escaping war zones, narco-terrorism, etc. I think we have an obligation to go ahead and ensure that those people who are truly disadvantaged make it in. And we need to ensure that we can staff up to handle that influx.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So when we look at Canada's history, we have a history of helping people who come to our borders, and that's something we can be very, very, very proud of, each and every one of us, especially those who have come from afar. We welcome you. And so when we talk about immigration and refugee status, I just want to comment on the Roxham Road comment that my friend made. These are not interfering with the streams of immigrants who have applied legally. There is a process at that checkpoint with the RCMP. They say to the people, you are going to be under arrest if you come across the border. They come across the border, they're arrested, they're screened. More than half of them are turned away. We absolutely need more immigration and family unification to keep our economy strong. For every 10% of immigration that we accept, our exports go up 1%, our GDP increases. And did you know that Canada has the most educated population of any country on earth because of the quality of immigrants and refugees that come to this country with postgraduate degrees? So this is something we absolutely need to champion, and the government has done a good job of championing so far, and I plan to keep enforcing in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
I think the first thing that we have to remember is that we are all immigrants. Other than the Indigenous people of Turtle Island, Canada is a country of immigrants. we need immigration. I agree with my colleagues to the left of me that immigration is necessary if Canada is going to grow our economy. They are here to open industry, to open jobs. Niagara needs these people to help pay taxes and employ other Canadians. They are not without difficulties. Certainly, we need to make a much greater investment in ESL and FSL funding. We need to provide a regular consultation with the immigration industry to make sure that people understand what the requirements are for immigration, particularly for professionals. We want to make sure that they understand the licensing requirements before they arrive in the country, so that when they arrive here, they're able to pass exams and make sure that they can be employed as other doctors and professionals in our country are.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
Yeah, I think every party here agrees on the fact that we are all immigrants at one time, and that's what made our country great and continues to make it great. But what we also need to do is ensure that our immigration is focusing on keeping Canada secure, keeping our citizens here safe. So we need to continue working hard to screen the immigrants, make sure we are not getting any terrorists and stuff like that coming in. And we do need to also realize that we need growth, but there is also a better way to promote growth, and that is through the issue of abortion.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
You guys are right. We do need immigration. We do need immigrants, but we need the right type of immigrants. We need skilled immigrants. Right now, under the Liberal immigration policy, only 26% of immigrants to Canada are actually economic immigrants. The rest of them are coming to Canada under their family reunification program, including the parents and grandparents of current immigrants to Canada. This puts an unfair burden on our healthcare system or refugees. Last year, we accepted more refugees than the United States, and they're 10 times our size. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce immigration from 350,000 a year to between 100 and 150,000 a year, and we're going to increase the number of skilled immigrants that we accept from 26% to between 55 and 80% of immigrants to Canada. We're going to eliminate birth tourism, birthright citizenship, and we're going to have a face-to-face interview with all immigrants that we accept into our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. The next question will start with Mr. Rahman. How would your party support our armed forces to purchase up-to-date equipment?
That's a complex question. If you're talking about purchasing up-to-date equipment, you need procurement systems that are fair and open. You need to understand what your needs are against what your threats are. You need to make sure that you can meet your commitments for your partners like NATO. So it's a multi-pronged approach in order to ensure that your forces are equipped to handle the threats that they're going to face around the world. And it's not just terrorism. I mean, we're looking at China that is going to be a dominant force on the Pacific coast. We need to ensure that we can support our allies should hostilities break out wherever it is as our foreign policy evolves. But that means understanding what those threats are, understanding what our needs are, understanding that the procurement systems have to be put in place that can deliver these goods as these services, equipment and weapons as required.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So warfare has changed over the last 100 years, and really the assets that Canada currently has don't really meet the needs of the current way warfare is conducted at all. Modern warfare is a lot more tactical, specific, targeted, and a lot of it's online and cyber. So my thoughts on this would be that we get assets and procurement that meets the future of warfare, which again is going to be cyber attacks and cyber defense. And for our northern border, where we have a disputed zone up in the melting ice caps, my thought on this issue has been drones, because drones are a good way of keeping an eye on everything, scanning for subs, etc. But we can also keep sovereignty of our nation that way, and it is less expensive. In terms of Canada's commitment moving forward as well, having been overseas and having seen that conventional military force really doesn't work to settle any seas, my suggestion would be an influx on peacekeeping equipment and peacekeeping missions and funding in that area. Conventional warfare is just not the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
Greens, of course, one of our policies is anti-violence, so it makes the question pretty difficult for us. But we certainly, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Bingham, to the left, that we need to make a much greater investment in peacekeeping forces. We were we punched well above our weight in the Pearson years in peacekeeping, and we're certainly able to do that again. I wonder whether or not the armed forces is better served at this particular point in time to help us mitigate the effects of climate change, to help us fight the forest fires in the north. Is it really what we need to invest in is more fighter jets when, as Mr. Bingham points out, drones might be able to do the same surveillance job for us in Canada's north? Or should we spend that money on Mars bombers? Our water bombers are regarded as the best examples in the world and are used all over the world, and we are going to need more fighter bombers to be able to deal with climate change in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
Yeah, the Christian Heritage Party definitely understands that we shouldn't be needing or as my partner said here beside me, that we need violence is not right. But at the same time, we need to realize that it does happen. We would obviously be in support of making our armed forces stronger and better equipped to face the future. And you would need to talk to the experts, and that would be the Army themselves, the generals and that are on the field, and the people that are on the field. And talking about our defense, we need to also be backing up and supporting our veterans that we've neglected in too many ways.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton, sorry.
Right now, our armed forces is grossly underfunded, and we will increase funding because it's dangerous to send them into peacekeeping zones with out-of-date equipment and with training that is inefficient. So we're going to do that. We're going to make responsible purchases when we're purchasing things like fighter jets, and we have a number of policies to take care of our veterans when they come home as well. We're also going to stay out of foreign wars and conflicts completely, because we're a peace-loving party, and unlike the Liberals, we're not going to be the second largest exporter to weapons to Saudi Arabia, which is destabilizing the region and fueling the civil war in Yemen. So, we aren't a peace-mongering party, and I would never support legislation that harms people in other countries unnecessarily when our safety is...
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Morton. Mr. Allison.
How many of you remember the name Mark Norman? It's funny how quickly we forget. Mark Norman was thrown under the bus by the Liberal Party because he was concerned about procurement around our defense. And if you think about it, the nation that we are, Canada, the fact that this Liberal government bought used airplanes, has bought used subs, and now we have shipyards that could build any number of these things doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think the challenge has always been, the Liberals have always had the ability to underfund our military, and I think this is important. We have a massive northern border that we're trying to protect. The only way we can do that, and I think drones is maybe part of the solution, absolutely. But when we look at doing our part for NATO and a number of other things, why are we buying used Australian jets? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I think there's a huge opportunity around shipbuilding. We've got shipyards on the east and the west coast. We have them in Quebec, and we have all kinds of opportunity. We should be procuring the needs for our defense right here at home in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. The next question will be addressed first to Mr. Bingham. What is your position on a woman's right to make choices around her body and the subject of the right to safe and legal abortions?
So let me be very unequivocal about this. I and the Liberal Party and most of you who I've spoken to at the doors, the thousands of you, support the right to choose. The woman has that right. That is her body and her right. And not only morally does that make sense. The Supreme Court was very clear on this. The highest court on our land in Morgentaler, over 30 years ago, said, this is a difficult question, but a woman's right outweighs fetal interest. And so when we're talking about a land that champions equality, champions diversity, champions LGBTQ rights, all this plays together in moving forward with the choices and the values that espouse equality. And I think this government has done a really good job to do that, and that's definitely something I champion. This isn't a hard question for me.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Teather.
Once again, it's an easy question for the Greens. I agree with Mr. Bingham. A woman's right to choose is paramount in this situation. The Greens are unequivocal in their support for women to make that choice. Particularly as a man, I can't imagine the difficulty it must be to make that decision for any woman. It puts them in a position where it must be just a terrible choice to have to make. But make no mistake, the Greens' position on this is unequivocal. We believe firmly in a woman's right to choose. It is her body and hers alone.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
I'm going to differ than every single person at this table. And the reason why is, you're right, a woman does have a right to choose. A woman has a right to choose to have children or not. But once there is a child in her womb, we now have two people. And science agrees. You cannot deny the fact that when a woman becomes pregnant, there are now two lives that we need to defend. So we will defend the rights for women, but we will also defend the right for the unborn.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
The People's Party of Canada has no official position on the issue, but they have allowed us to put forth any legislation that we wish and to have that be openly voted on and debated within Parliament. So a member of one of our candidates has drawn up a private member's bill, the Protection of Preborn Children Act, which I support completely. And that legislation is going to ban abortion past 6 months, excluding situations where the female's life or the fetus's life is in danger, or if it's in the case of rape or incest. So I think that's just common sense. 2/3 of Canadians support legislation to restrict abortion in the third trimester. So actually, I'm just trying to put forth a policy position that the majority of Canadians support, because I believe it's just common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Mr. Allison.
Yes, I've been pro-life since I first got elected in 2004, and my position has not changed on that. One of the things I appreciate about our party is we have the right to vote our conscience on issues of conscience, and I think that's unique than most of the other parties in the Parliament. And so that's been my position. My position hasn't changed.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
The answer is very simple for me and for the NDP. We support the woman's right to choose. However, it may seem like, I understand that it's a complex question, but the right to choose isn't just the right to choose, it's also the right to access. If you take a look at the ability to access healthcare around Canada, it's actually quite limited. If you take a look at the East Coast in particular, the right to choose is restricted because it's not funded by the healthcare system. It's considered to be a private service delivery. I think a woman's right to choose is untouchable. I'll do what it takes to ensure it's untouchable, but also fight to ensure that we've got the services that women need to make the choices that are appropriate for them. And it's an individual choice at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. The next question will go first to Mr. Teather. As a candidate, do you support electoral reform or first past the post voting? Can you describe your vision of what electoral reform might look like?
Yeah, unquestionably, we support electoral reform. We were very disappointed in the last election when Mr. Trudeau reneged on his promise of electoral reform. There were many, many youth that voted in favor of the Liberal Party based on that particular issue alone. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, when you get 39% of the vote, and that translates into 100% of the power for 4 years, electoral reform is necessary. The Greens would support a mixed-member proportional system that allows you to have 2 votes. One of those votes would be for representing a local member of parliament in your local area, and then you would also have a second vote, and that vote would be used to represent a party. So when you consider that a place like New Zealand has had proportional representation, and they just had a referendum on proportional representation and voted overwhelmingly to keep it, we want to make sure that people have that choice.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Jonker.
The Christian Heritage Party definitely is in favor of changing how our system is, and basically I agree with the Green Party here with that. We do need to look at a system because 39% of the people vote, and that party has dictatorship basically over where we're going. So there's a lot of different systems out there, and it would be definitely very prudent for us to investigate which one works better. But I do know that when you do look at all the other countries that do have it, it might seem like you have a lot of different parties or you have a lot of different opinions, but having different parties and different opinions working together actually makes for better government.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
So the People's Party of Canada doesn't support electoral reform. We believe that the current system, although it's not perfect, is working well and it should stay in place. However, I am deeply against politicians lying to the Canadian people like Trudeau did when he promised electoral reform. That just leaves me to the question, do the promises of any of these candidates, namely the Conservatives and Liberals, have any credibility given their track record of dishonesty and corruption? The Canadian people have been lied to long enough, and it needs to come to an end. It needs to come to an end right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Mr. Allison.
Thank you very much. I do not support a proportional representation system. I had a chance to work with some colleagues from around the world at a conference we were at, and they talked about the fact that they had a mixed proportional representation system where she was the elected member and there was a proportional one. She wasn't the government, so although she had accountabilities on the list in terms of proportional representation, that individual didn't have any direct responsibility. In other words, that person couldn't be fired. They're on a list. And one of the things, and I would agree with Miles on this, is that one of the things that, even though the system is not perfect, is that you have an opportunity every 4 years or 2 years or whenever the elections are called to look at the member that you have running in any area, and you have an opportunity to vote that person out if you so choose. That would not happen in any kind of proportional representation system because you would be on a party list and you would have very limited direct representation.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
There's this amazing video on YouTube of Justin Trudeau for 167 times saying he would do away with proportional representation, and wouldn't you know it, he didn't. In fact, he threw his minister right under the bus when that debate came up. The fact of the matter is 40% of the vote should not translate into absolute power or a majority of seats. It just doesn't make sense. That's not the representative approach that's not representative of how Canada voted. Should it be mixed member proportional representation? I don't know. There are multiple flavors of that, but I do think that the current system needs to change, and we need to shift it. And the NDP government, I believe this would be something akin to a first term commitment, would be to shift our electoral system to a to a proportional representation system. What that final model will look like, there's plenty of variation over there. I think that can be open for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So tonight you've heard me talk about some of the positive things that have happened in the last 4 years, the economy stronger, the environment, lifting people out of poverty. Now let me tell you about where you've been let down and where I've heard at the doors that you feel let down, and that's electoral reform. So this is something that I support and that I'm going to continue to support on behalf of you, who I've heard it from, and thousands of you at the doors in the House of Commons. The form of which, to me, I'm not too particular about ranked ballot or proportional representation. Both will allow a stronger voice that you have to be shared at Parliament. Now, one of the issues why it didn't happen, it's no excuse, but one of the reasons it didn't happen, there was a referendum in BC, there was a referendum in Ontario, and much like those sitting at the table today, Canada couldn't decide what they wanted, and that's what ended up happening. So unfortunately, our government didn't do enough background research before putting that promise forward, but it's still something I believe in. And while we're on the subject of voting, I think it's noteworthy that we will be enhancing the ability for students to vote, and if you're a senior that needs a ride to the polls, please give my office a call.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. The next question goes to Mr. Jonker. Do you believe that municipalities should be able to implement independent measures with regard to gun control?
That's a good one to ask me, considering where I sit in the municipality. To tell you the honest truth, I don't think so. I would not support that probably as a federal MP but also as a township councillor. Gun control is something that I believe the Liberals tried to do and with the long rifle, and it basically cost us billions of dollars and didn't actually work. What we need to realize is the criminals will never register their guns. The criminals will never tell us where their guns are. But what we need to do is give the police more support in fighting those who do gun trafficking and criminally. So.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Morton.
No, we support gun owners, but we don't support legislation based just in certain ridings and jurisdictions. We want to get rid of the Firearms Act and replace that with a new certification system, more common sense. We want to simplify the certification system into a lifetime certification system. We need to stop classifying firearms based on the way that they look and arbitrary political whims, and on their function and on how dangerous they are to Canadian society. We need to stop penalizing legal gun owners and start penalizing and going after and spending that energy to go after criminals on the street that have illegal firearms, because they're the ones that are committing the majority of gun crime. The majority of gun crime is not occurring out here in rural Canada. It's occurring in the inner cities with illegal guns that are coming over from the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Mr. Allison.
Yeah, there's a number of things here. I don't believe that for 1 second municipalities should have this option. The reality is that if you're in Etobicoke or Mississauga, where the large amount of crime is in Toronto, I don't know how that really matters. I think that's a symptom of the problem, and we need to speak to what the real problem is. And the real problem is illegal guns coming over across the border. The real problem is gangs. The real problem is violent repeat offenders. The real problem is the fact that we don't give our police enough resources to make these things happen. We don't give our CBSA officials enough resources to make this happen. So if you're going to crack down on this, I don't believe for 1 second you should be dealing with law-abiding citizens. Criminals do not register their guns. It's just a known fact. And the majority of the issues we have around illegal guns, there's a whole bunch of other things that we would do, tackle straw purchases, there's a whole bunch of things that we could do that would make a bigger deal. But at the end of the day, if there's a revolving door of crime with the same people committing these crimes, those people should be staying in jail.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Mr. Rahman.
This is an extraordinarily complex question. As to some of the data, one of the things that the Globe and Mail did was they looked at the issue of gun crime just a couple of weeks ago, and what they said was that it's not so, first of all, not only do we not track gun crime well and where weapons have come from, what they also said was that when you take a look at where these guns have come from, only 50% of these come from the States. The other 50 are procured internally. That means that they were legally bought at some point within Canada, and oftentimes people with large caches of weapons will sell them and claim that they're stolen. So I don't think the problem is as cut and dry as you make it out to be. Whether a municipality should be able to ban guns, and there's going to be a distinction between handguns and long guns. In rural areas, people tend to own long guns for hunting purposes. In municipalities, handguns becomes the problem. Truthfully told, I'm not sure what the appropriate approach is. I'd be open to a ban, but I'm not sure if that necessarily fixes the problem, because there are other elements like community outreach, effective policing, and whatnot that would have to be engaged in.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Bingham.
So we have to be clear about what kind of firearms we're talking about here. This is handguns and assault rifles that are on the table right now in the Canadian public eye. And these are weapons that aren't used to hunt animals. These are used to hunt humans. And I've been trained with them, and I can tell you they have no place in Canadian society. I think it absolutely is a good idea. However, it's not a slippery slope. Rifles that people here in Niagara West use to hunt or to keep pests off their property, I totally support. Those are safe weapons, and those aren't usually used in crime. And so when we look at the shooting in St. Catharines that happened only 2 days ago, we know that handguns and these weapons are used to cause destruction in our society. And we take a page out of Australia's notebook. They banned handguns and guns of any sort. And look, their gun violence has gone down. So we know it works, but it's not a panacea. The root cause of gun violence is not guns. It is mental health and youth who get into the wrong kind of activity when they're young. So more investment in our young people in education and programming will help also stem the violence.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. And Mr. Teather.
You'll pardon me if I get a little bit choked about this particular question. There are people in this room who understand my situation. My only son was killed 11 years ago by an illegal weapon. The police in Calgary have just phoned to indicate that charges have finally been laid against that individual. Understand this. I am not against legal gun owners. I am not against long gun owners. I am not against target shooters. But 80% of the guns that come into this country come through the United States illegal, and we need to make sure that we strengthen that border security. We need to prosecute those gun smugglers under the criminal code, not as some sort of customs violation. Gangs are a significant issue, and we need to devote much more money to the education of our youth to ensure that they don't join gangs and become statistics themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teather. It's just about 8:30, so we're now at a time when we want to move to the next phase of our session, and that is the closing remarks from the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes, and we will go in the reverse order from what we did with the opening remarks. So we'll start with Mr. Morton, and we'll move to this end of the table. So, Mr. Morton, 2 minutes.
Could I have a restart, perhaps? Thanks a lot.
Yes, that's fine.
In this election, you're going to be faced with two choices. The establishment parties, who both have similar policies. They're so similar that I can barely tell the difference between them. Or the bold reforms of the People's Party of Canada. With all the establishment parties, you'll get endless deficit spending, climate alarmism, mass immigration into our country, the transfer of Canadian sovereignty to the United Nations, cronyism, corruption, and the erosion of our freedoms, including the freedom of the press and freedom of speech. These freedoms are the central pillar of our democracy. We offer a different path, a different future for Canada, a future of economic prosperity, sustainable immigration, fiscal responsibility, lower taxes, and the protection of our freedoms, and the rebirth of Canadian patriotism. In my vision for Canada, the Canadian government is controlled by the Canadian people, not by special interest groups, not by lobbyists, not by elites, and not by international bureaucracy. This is the most important election in the history of our country. Our national unity and our existence as a unique people hangs in the balance. In this election, reject globalism, reject elitist control of our government, and vote for a party that will keep Canada strong and free for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Mr. Jonker.
Let me close by saying that we as a society of many different people with different backgrounds need to be better informed by what is going on. We are being presented with so many half-truths and even false information that it gets really confusing to know what we should be doing and where we need to go. The environment concerns that are being presented to us are not being presented in a way that gives us the full information. We need to continue to hang our clean laundry on the line to dry when possible, to reuse ice cream buckets and bags, and to use the spatula to get out the last of the jam out of the jar. Things that I was taught as a kid, but just thought it was being Dutch. We as a country need to protect our environment from man-mixed chemicals, and it needs to be done wisely. CO2 is not a pollutant. It is a gas needed by all plants. Saying that it is a pollutant is an unproven theory, and the CHP would cancel all and any carbon taxes. We need better policies and better leadership for this beautiful country. So help me take that message to Ottawa. The CHP has policies to promote and protect the family, policies to bring in restitution as part of our justice system. Canada's Christian heritage, our history, is what made this country strong and free and good for everyone to live in. Our policies are set to make Canada a better place for everyone. Check out our website at chp.ca and then vote Harold Jonker, CHP in Niagara West on October 21st. CHP stands for family, life, and freedom.
Thank you, Mr. Jonker. Mr. Teather.
Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, in this election, it is really about youth more than it is about anything else. It's about how the next generation that will inherit the world we leave them will thrive. Climate anxiety is real. I saw it at the climate march on Friday. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's not about climate change, it's about everything change. We are at a crossroad, and we must make decisions that show them that we are willing to make the tough choices that they stand for and that they believe in. Their involvement in the political process is intensifying, and this is good news for democracy. They are making their voices heard. Now we must listen. Far more importantly, we must act, and from now on, every four-year government that does nothing vital steals something of their future. My brother has a t-shirt. It says, "Science, it got us this far." We need to trust scientific, evidence-based decisions to guide the policies and the regulations and laws that Parliament enacts. Proven methods exist for bettering our healthcare system, reducing emissions and poverty, solving the climate crisis, and showing the world that Canada will lead a new green economic reality. We can begin now. In fact, we must begin now. And finally, we need to renew people's confidence and trust in politics by providing ethical, caring, and honest leadership. We have a plan to do all these things, and we want you to be a part of it. Join us by voting Green this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teather. Mr. Bingham.
Just before I begin, we should make some land acknowledgement rights about the the land we now stand on and think about that and the Indigenous people in our country. So since no question is really asked in the closing arguments, I think I want to talk a bit about, first of all, about you. I want to say thank you again, because your engagement in this process is critical, and it's been a pleasure meeting many of you at your doors. So a question I'm asked often at the doors is, what is the candidate going to do for you? Because the candidate matters. The lawn signs that you see, the name of the candidate is the one that's the biggest, because those are the people fighting for each of every one of you at the House of Commons. So what am I going to do? What am I going to try to do? My goals for this riding are shaped by what you have told me at the doors. We need to take better care of our environment, that's certain. And I can tell you this truthfully. The Liberal Party currently is the only party with the will and the opportunity to bring Canada to carbon neutrality, and that's something that's very important for me. But what about seniors in our riding? How about increasing the guaranteed income for seniors, increasing at-home care with PSWs, increasing public transit and pharmacare? This is going to bring great benefit to people here in this riding. What about transportation? The QEW, have you ever tried to drive on it? So let's work on getting a new trade corridor in the area, a highway that's going to bring growth and development and jobs that are badly needed in this area, and that's something that I'm going to fight for federally. When we talk about the smell of cannabis, we haven't brought that up, but in many parts of the riding, it's a horrible nuisance. And so this is something that I plan to do to fight for you with Health Canada to get regulations on board and to help with municipal bylaws to make sure that those issues don't trouble so many of our people in this riding anymore. And finally, we need to bring growth to this area, new jobs. This area deserves new jobs, deserves strong representation. So we have an advantage here with cannabis coming in, even though it's a nuisance right now. We can turn it into a great profit through the CBD oil exportation and through, as I said earlier, investment in our local entrepreneurs and great talent we have here in the riding to increase this, the income of this riding and make life better for us and all Canadians. That's my promise to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Rahman.
I love it when a Liberal candidate every 4 years says pharmacare. Because every 4 years they say pharmacare and they don't deliver. And that is what you get at the door when you say, I don't believe in the political process anymore. And I mean this dead seriously. Because in the last few years, we've had a string of broken promises. If you're going to say something, deliver it. And it hasn't happened. We've seen this happen with the Conservative government, whether they call it tax cuts. We've seen this with the Liberal government, who'll say one thing, do something else altogether, and people want change. And when I go to the door, what I find is an appetite for change, but people caught in the politics of fear sometimes. They fear if they give up the way they vote, that things will change for the worse. I'm here to say that the NDP will fight for you. Give us a chance. Give me a chance. Every day, day in, day out. The funny thing about the NDP is it's always been the bridesmaid, but never the bride. A few weeks ago, there was a survey that came out that said it was the number 2 choice in every province, even Quebec. And that tells you something. Even if you're Conservative, the number 2 choice is NDP. If you're Liberal, the number 2 choice is NDP. If you're Green, the number 2 choice is NDP. And for the NDP supporters, number 1 choice is NDP. There is a better path. And the reason why you've put us there is because you see something there and you're not necessarily sure if you're going to take that step. I urge you to take that step. Because in the last 15 years, you've seen what you've gotten and you've gotten nothing. It's time to choose different. It's time to move forward. It's time to choose a progressive government that will work for the things that are important to you. Healthcare, environment, seniors, jobs, family, community. That's what it comes down to. And I promise you this, I'll be there for you day in, day out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. Mr. Allison.
Thank you. You've had a chance to hear from 6 different parties tonight with 6 different views and the directions they want to take this country. I've had the honor to serve as your MP for the last 15 years, and it's been a privilege to do so. Before getting elected, I served as the president of the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital Foundation some 15, 16 years ago. As a foundation, we raised more money in the history of this area for a new hospital, which we hoped would be in the ground immediately. Here we are 16 years later, wondering where it is. I was fortunate as I had a front row seat to see the kindness and generosity of all the people, not only from this community, but from all over the area, who were able to give to that new hospital to be built. One of my concerns as we move forward is will this still be the case in the future? As the current government continues to spend recklessly, The only way money can be paid back is through increases in taxation. And since there's only one taxpayer, that means either through your businesses or you as individuals, you'll be footing the bill. We see the Liberal government has tried to do 2 summers ago when they went after small businesses. Remember them calling them tax cheats? Employee discounts, people with diabetes, etc. As they look for new ways to tax people. I'm afraid that if the Liberals are elected again, they will continue to look for ways to get additional revenues in through excessive taxes to deal with their massive deficits. All of you work hard, play by the rules, and believe in a strong Canada. But many are wondering if you're able to afford to help your kids out with school, etc. Conservatives have a plan to put more money in your pockets, to let you keep more of your hard-earned dollars, and in the process, eliminate government waste. Conservatives believe you know best how to spend your tax dollars, and you deserve more of them in your pockets. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight, and I hope that over the last 2 hours, you've had an idea of what the Conservative plan is, will do for all of you, and how we're going to keep you working on you getting ahead and keep more of your hard-earned tax dollars where they belong, and that is in your pocket. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. We're getting close to the end of the formal part of our procedure tonight, and so I want to give some thank yous as well. It's very difficult to be a candidate for office. It's very time-consuming, and there's another kind of cost as well when you hold yourself out there to be evaluated by your fellow citizens. That's not an easy process to go through. But it's a very important process, and I think we should thank all 6 of the people here who have put their names forward to seek election in this election. So thank all of you very much. As a moderator and speaking on behalf of the candidates, I think I can do that safely. I want to thank you for attending as well. I mean, this is, as I said at the beginning, this is a great opportunity for candidates to get their message out there. And it's a great opportunity for you to hear and to help you make a decision, to help you make a good informed decision when you go to the polls in about 3 weeks. Thank you for coming, and thank you for behaving in a very respectful and proper way tonight. So, up front, we'll give you some applause up front. And finally, I want to thank the organizers of this event, the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, the Grimsby and District Chamber of Commerce, and the West Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. It requires, when you come here, this all looks really smooth, and I would thank the organizers. This was all very smooth for me. But I know how much work goes on behind the scenes building up to this. And it's a tremendous service that the chambers have provided to the communities. And I think all of us should thank the chambers for giving us all an opportunity like this. So. Oh, yes.
I'm going to reiterate some of those thank yous. Thank you to you for coming out. Thank you for our candidates. Without the cooperation and support of our event committee and our stalwart volunteers, nights like this just wouldn't happen. Event organizing, marketing, distributing flyers, setting up the venue, compiling our questions, handling parking. The list is a very long one. I'd like to just mention the team that put this together, and if you can wait until I've mentioned the entire team and then acknowledge them for their support and show them that their contribution is appreciated, that would be great. Marty Borschenbosch, our timer, Colleen O'Hearn, Brian Jones, Clark Bucknell, Diane Rajima, Jeremy Byron, Jesse O'Hearn, Laura Petrunik, Kent Petrunik, Alejandra Whitcharts, Kira Potter, Paul Robertson, the West Lincoln football team, Carol Furrer, John Dunstall, Matthew Toohey and the team from Smithville Christian High for handling our sound system this evening, and Kevin Jack from WeeStream for his live streaming services, and of course, our moderator, Dr. David Siegel. Thank you. So as noted, this ends the formal portion of our event, but it's not over yet. Please note that each one of the candidates has agreed to stay afterwards. If you had a question that you didn't get enough of an answer for, if you had a question that wasn't brought forward, if you'd just like to explore something a little bit further, please do stay and chat with them. They would really like to get their answers across so that you can make a really well-informed decision in 3 weeks. We were here until 9:30. At that point, we will ask that you vacate the building and the parking lot. Thank you so much for joining us.